Core, let's compute. All right. So, Anthony, I'm sure everyone knows you, but let's just go ahead and just dive in a quick introduction because I'm with Dr. Anthony Chaffee here. We're going to cover a lot of different stuff. But why don't you go ahead and give us a quick introduction? And I got some questions for you here.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, so I'm just I'm an American doctor and rugby player. Came to nutrition just through my interest in medicine and also in my performance as an athlete, and just happened to come across a carnivore diet about 22 years ago, just from learning just how toxic plants were in college when I was at the University of Washington, and that sparked me to just stop eating plants altogether at that time, and I felt absolutely amazing. Didn't really realize how significant what I was doing was at the time. So it was, it was easier to slip off it, but I was doing it for, a good 5 years. So it actually did take some doing. And then more recently, in the last 5 years or so, I came back across it and, realizing that humans actually are carnivores. And that's what I was doing. That's what I was doing differently. That's why I felt so amazing. And so I've just dug into the research since then and tried to incorporate that into my practice and certainly my lifestyle. And so that's what I'm doing. And now I'm down in Perth, Australia, in my specialty residency of neurosurgery, and also doing trying to help people on the side with diet and lifestyle changes.
That's awesome. So one of the things I really have been keen to talk to you about is, I know you're doing a residency in surgery, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with Stefan Guyane, and I don't know if I'm saying his name right. He's a neuroscientist, big into nutrition, and he has a book called Hungry Brain. And the premise, he's a guy I've respected, read his stuff for a long time, and I think he's a really smart guy, obviously a very smart guy, PhD neuroscientist. But his kind of thesis, and he studies obesity. And the reason I am fascinated by obesity is I feel like if we really solved obesity and we really knew what was driving obesity, a lot of the other diseases of modern civilization would abate or at least decrease significantly. And so anyways, Stefan Guyane, hopefully I'm saying his name right. I'm always just reading it, but his kind of thesis is this hyperpalatability. And to me, I feel like it's part of the equation. And I'm very curious to hear what your thoughts are around this, because I don't feel like it answers the whole obesity crisis. Because, for example, I eat a steak and it's hyperpalatable, but it's not going to lead me to obesity. I don't think. So I'm very curious about your thoughts around the brain and obesity, and just any kind of thoughts in that regard.
Yeah, well, I think the main issue with the hyperpalatability would be things like sugar and carbohydrates, which are addictive. And well, sugar is specifically fructose, gives a dopamine response to your brain. So it gives this reward center hit for eating it, and so that's going to make it more easier to eat. But steak, like you say, a steak is very easy to eat, but it does different things biochemically. And so I think, just using a sort of a general term, hyperpalatability, you could certainly apply that to almost anything, really.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And but the difference between eating hyperpalatable processed food with a bunch of sugar and carbs and a steak is that your body is naturally set up to process the steak, and so that's the energy that it wants, and so it can recognize how much is coming in, and it will say, okay, that's enough, we'll stop here, and it will stop actually tasting good. So it won't be hyperpalatable after a while. It'll actually start to taste bad. And I'm sure you've noticed this. I've certainly noticed this. I've had patients who have normally have a much higher portion of food that they're eating. They go carnivore and they're saying, I really hate this, I don't like it, I don't enjoy it, because it's just really painful to eat all this meat and eggs. I just don't like it, I'm not enjoying it. But then you talk to them and you find out that at the beginning of the meal they actually loved it, but like halfway through the meal they start hating it, and they have to force feed themselves. So that's not hyperpalatable, but your brain is changing. It's the same food, it's the same nutrition, it should have the same chemical response, but it doesn't. So there's more going on there. And so the difference with carbs and sugar is that you'll keep that that hyperpalatability up, and because it changes your basically your hormonal signals to tell your brain that you're starving all the time. So you never become satiated. So you're blocking leptin, you're upregulating ghrelin, and your brain is thinking constantly that you're basically going to die of starvation. So you need to eat, you need to eat, you need to eat. And so that's, I think, biochemically in your brain going to be the difference there, and why you're going to tend to overeat with carbohydrates and sugar, but not with steak.
Yep. So it's like this diminishing returns, which is like you eat the first half pound of steak and then the second half pound of steak. Not necessarily, it's like you don't want to eat another pound, where it's, with the cookie, it's like, okay, I eat one, I want the second one almost as much, maybe more than the first one, and so on and so on. But if you don't mind, I'd like to dive deeper into this, because there's certain things that like I have hypotheses around, but I'd like, this is a part of like nutrition I feel like is like, it's not solved. And for example, if we look at like caloric intake, basically, and I think it's pretty clear it's like the average calorie intake has risen over the last 70 years, but I think less substantially than people realize. And it seems like, let's just call it 500 calories. We're eating 500 calories more. But for example, let's say I eat 2,500 calories a day, and then I start eating 3,000 calories a day. I'm going to gain weight, but then I'm going to like plateau. I'm not going to just keep getting fatter and fatter and fatter. But what we see in American standard American diet is people that get obese, like they get fatter and then they get fatter and fatter and fatter and fatter. It's like the body, like to me, this is like the definition of metabolism breaking. It's like, yes, you fattened up, that we're probably designed to fatten up, store some fat for winter, times when in food scarcity, but it breaks when two things in my mind happen. One is that like you don't reach that homeostasis that you should. And then two, you just keep putting on more and more fat without a subsequent increase in basal metabolic rate. And what I mean by it is like when I would do bodybuilding competitions, like I would try and eat more and more and more over time, and I would get hot. Like, and when I stopped doing that, I would drop weight really quick, because the body wants that homeostasis, this lipostat, which is like, okay, I've turned up the lipostat, it wants to come back down to a normal healthy body weight. But in obesity, we don't see that. Like that lipostat breaks, and people continue to put on more and more fat. And a lot of times people think it's like calories is the answer. And to me, it's like, it goes deeper than that, because you should hit a homeostasis even if you're overeating a few hundred calories. So there's something deeper, and I'm going to turn it over to you. Let me know what you think.
Well, I mean, there are certainly differences in your metabolism and how you burn calories, just on the different metabolic states that you're in. Professor Ben Bickman from BYU talks about how just being in a ketogenic state, your basal metabolic rate like jumps up like 300 calories. Like you will just burn 300 more calories just by not eating carbohydrates. So you're eating 2,000 calories from carbohydrates or 2,000 calories just from meat. You will actually use more calories when you're just eating meat.
Now, I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you up, but I wanted to touch on that. I want to talk to Ben too, because I've listened to I listened to your guys' podcast, and one thing that wasn't clear to me is that 250 extra calories you're burning, is it? Do we know? Is it from like non-exercise activity thermogenesis, where people just have more energy moving around, or is it like an increase in like mitochondrial uncoupling and like releasing energy as heat? Like to me, like what is like what's the underlying mechanism? Like I'm super curious if like you guys talked about that, or what those extra calories are coming from.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah, no, I didn't ask him that specifically, but that's a very, very good question. It'd be interesting to see what that was. I should have thought about that at that time. Yeah,
I'm sure part of it is like the thermic effect of food, because like usually people that are low carb are eating higher protein. Not always, but usually that's the case. And so some of that thermogenesis will be there, I assume. But I've gone down the rabbit hole where I feel like the bottom of the rabbit hole I always reach is a failure of, to me, it seems like mitochondrial uncoupling, people being able to use leptin and burn energy as heat. And instead of doing that, they store it as energy. And to me, that's kind of where I've come to my conclusions, but I don't know. It's not, I don't think it's like, no one has like solved this mystery for me. So, that's why I'm talking to you. Hopefully we'll talk to Bickman and see what people say there's this guy, his name's Pedro Dobro Molinsky. I can't ever say his last name either. He writes at Hyperlipid, and basically his theory is like what took me down this rabbit hole towards, polyunsaturated fats, these vegetable seed oils that are causing this mitochondrial dysfunction, where leptin's not doing its job. Like in obese people, leptin is higher, but they're not, for some reason, it's not working like it should, right? Because the leptin, for people that don't know, is a hormone that basically is going to help increase fat burning. It basically turns on the CPT1 shuttle of fat into the mitochondria to burn it. And it seems like that mechanism is, at least it's not working like it should.
Yeah. Well, insulin opposes leptin.
Exactly.
And so, that's going to slow that down as well. But also fructose independently blocks leptin as well. So, and it upregulates ghrelin, right? So ghrelin is sort of the opposing hormone to leptin. We think of it in our stretch receptors in our stomach. When we eat something, our stretch receptors go out, leptin is secreted, but actually the majority of it is secreted from our fat cells. So if we have a lot of adipose tissue, we're going to produce a lot of leptin. When our stomach is empty, we're going to produce ghrelin. So if we have low leptin and high ghrelin, then our brain sort of gets a signal that, we don't really have many fat stores and we don't have anything in the pipeline, because our stomach's empty. So that's something that's a trigger for hunger. It says like, hey, we need to eat something. And so when you're eating carbohydrates, your insulin goes up, that's going to block leptin. And then fructose is also going to block leptin, and it's also going to upregulate ghrelin. So you get this sort of perfect storm of tricking your brain into thinking starving to death, and or just muddying the water so your brain can't tell one way or the other. And so fructose, it's lower on the glycemic index, but it will raise your insulin at some point. Also, it has glucose in it. Sucrose is usually the form of sugar that we get fructose from, and that's half glucose. So you will get this insulin bump, you will get this fructose bump, and that will have a compounding effect on blocking leptin and just screwing up the whole works. So yeah.
So so do you think like it's mostly leptin's kind of antagonistic role to leptin that is preventing leptin from working like it should? Because the leptin resistance is like this kind of term people use, but to me, it's not super clear what that really means. I know, like, if you inject an obese person, they already have high leptin, you inject them with more leptin, it really doesn't solve the problem at all. So like there's something fundamentally like not working with leptin. And is it just insulin's too high and so leptin's ineffective, or is it something else?
Well, it's certainly going to play a role. I think that's going to be a major role. And now, if down the line we have such high leptin for such a long time that people become insensitive to it, maybe that's certainly a possibility. But I think the main problem, or at least a major problem, is that this signal is being blocked by insulin and fructose as well. So I think that that's a major factor. Yeah, is the insulin.
So last thing on this, we can switch topics, but the one thing that I was curious about, and I've seen, I know you've been interested in like studying both paleoanthropology as well as just like kind of, I got Weston Price book behind me here, where he was dentist, traveler, explorer who looked at indigenous tribes and like the modern diet entering, so the intersection in the 1930s. And what I want to talk about was kind of like this French paradox, where like French in the like early 20th century, they seem to have this hyperpalatable diet where it did have a decent amount of sugar, a lot of flour, a lot of dairy, saturated fat. To me, like you mix that up, like it's pretty hyperpalatable, and they didn't experience obesity, at least nothing near like we have today. And so the reason I brought up Weston Price was there is this indigenous group of people in Switzerland, kind of like all the offshoots, that they basically subsisted on basically dairy and rye and were very healthy. He like didn't suffer the diseases that he was seeing in other parts of Switzerland. And so the question is about this French paradox, which I think we've seen in a lot of other areas where they did have a higher carbohydrate diet, but they didn't suffer obesity. And to me, Stephen Guyanet's theory of just hyperpalatability, especially when it comes to like the French diet, it kind of fails there, because They were eating
Mm.
tons of butter and dairy. They had a good amount of sugar, probably not the levels we're eating today, but a good amount of flour too. And they weren't obese. I'm not saying that's like a healthy diet by any stretch of the imagination, but they weren't obese. And to me, it's very interesting because a lot of people's obesity theories kind of fall on the wayside I mean, if you look at that epidemiologically.
Yeah, I think yeah, it'd be interesting to look at sort of very specifically what they ate and the proportion that they ate it. You look at like a Mediterranean diet, they always say, oh, it's just a bunch of pasta, bunch of pasta, bunch of pasta. It's not. It's mostly meat. It's mostly butter and animal fat, and they'll have a little bit of pasta on the side. And
Yeah.
so maybe they were eating a lot of carbs and bread, but how much of that were they eating in proportion to their diet? They do eat a lot of saturated fat, and they do eat a lot of butter and animal fat. I think that's in their favor. I think that's probably seeing them through a lot of this. And and also sugar consumption, I think, is a major one, especially fructose. Is a big problem.
That is interesting.
Less.
And those
Yeah.
two groups that I mentioned, like fructose was fairly low. That they weren't like big fruit eaters. Especially in
Yeah.
Switzerland, it was cold. Cold, probably little to no fruit.
Yeah, yeah, and Dr. Robert Lustig from UCSF, he certainly makes the case that it's fructose specifically that's driving a lot of these diseases and obesity, and so that probably has a lot to do with it as well. Is that certainly from the disease side of things, fructose being a driving factor there, but it's I think if you sort of break it down and look at it, being that they ate a lot of saturated fat and meat as well, that's probably going to be a major proportion of their caloric intake, and they're probably having some bread on the side, but maybe not as much sugar as well. I think that's probably what's doing well for them.
Yeah.
People can handle a lot of stuff, but it's just right now when we're really just almost solely consuming high octane crap that
Yeah.
we're really starting to see this serious degradation in our health. So it's I think it's more testament to how bad we're doing it now, as opposed to
Those being ideal
yeah.
diets. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And the French diet may not be an ideal diet. Also, be that especially back in the middle of the 20th century, food was a lot more expensive, and so maybe you're eating things you maybe shouldn't, but you were just financially constrained to only eating a certain amount, and food's not as cheap in Europe as it is in America, or most of the rest of the world. And so that's a thing as well, especially at that time. And even in America, food was much more expensive at the time. So
Yep. The one ingredient, I'll call it ingredient, that I universally see that if it was eaten, we see obesity, and that is like these seed oils. Because like you mentioned, like the Swiss group, even like we look at like Chinese farmers, they eat a ton of, like a high percentage of their diet is rice, but the meat that they were eating, it's meat and saturated fats. And it seems like when we change the fat, especially, so we're losing the fat, we're losing the fat soluble vitamins, and we replace that with these vegetable seed oils, like things just go haywire.
yeah,
And I don't know if there's an Occam's razor to like obesity, but if I had to point at like, one or two things, it's like the changing out of natural animal fats for these processed plants fats, to me, might be the most dangerous dietary thing that we've done. And I'm not saying, hey, let's go eat sugar. I know there is a big like sugar group out there that's like thinks it's a healthy food these days. I don't think it should make up a substantial part of our diet, especially fructose, like you mentioned. There's one study I bring up a lot because to me it really hammers the like nail in the coffin, so to speak, with fructose. Is like they took these obese children, and maybe we talked about this, where the obese kids, they were drinking regular soda, and when they did this trial, when they stopped drinking the soda, not only did their calories reduce by the amount that they eliminated from drinking the soda, like first of all, they did not eat more to compensate for those loss of calories, which is interesting. Secondly, the calories didn't only drop by that much, but it dropped below that. So like the sodas were causing them to eat over and beyond the amount that they were getting in the soda. I mean, so the soda was causing them to eat over and beyond what they normally would if they removed it. And it's just a fascinating study where it's like, man, it really is like, it goes to like the neuroscience of it. Like something in the brain is causing like, man, I had 120 grams of sugar from high fructose corn syrup. Not only did that not satiate me to 120 grams of energy, but I eat more because I ate that 120 grams of energy, which is a interesting kind of thing. Like if we think of like humans as like, we need energy to survive. Like that energy is so bad that we eat, it causes us to eat even more than we would without it. It's interesting.
Yeah, no, it is. And yeah, there was a study that Lustig did in the last couple of years, and he's published several papers as a result of it. But he took two groups of kids, sort of, I think around like sort of 10 years old, and they all had metabolic syndrome, right? So they all had, they're all overweight, they had fatty liver disease, they had all these other, metabolic markers of disease. And so these are 10-year-olds, these are young people. And he had two groups. He separated them out, and he had one group stay the same caloric intake and stay the same weight. So he just had one group just drop the fructose, but still eat junk crap, so he still eat a bunch of carby nonsense just without the fructose. So instead of donuts, it would be bagels, And so when some group, they were talking to him every day, they get on a scale every day, and if some of them were losing weight, they're like, no, eat more, we want you to stay the same weight. So they try to keep everyone the same weight, and everyone eating the same calories or at least enough to stay the same weight. And just after like something like 10 days or something like that, 8 to 10 days, the metabolic syndrome in the group without fructose started to reverse. So they actually had a significant decrease in their fatty liver and other markers. So it was just independent of calories, independent of anything else, and they were eating a bunch of highly palatable processed carb crap, and but just without the fructose, this changed how their body worked metabolically, which of course it would. I mean, this whole idea of this, a calorie is a calorie is I mean, it's just dumb. I mean, because like we've all taken biology, biochemistry, and just even just normal chemistry. Like these are organic compounds, and we know about organic compounds is they actually have chemical reactions possible dependent on their structure and dependent on their interactions. And so you have an entirely different structure of protein, entirely different structure of carbohydrates, entirely different structure of fatty acids. These are going to act as different chemicals in your body. So the idea that they're going to just, the only thing that matters about them is their as how much energy they release when you burn it in a beaker,
right,
is a bit sophomoric. I mean, you're just not really giving it its due. So when you eat different things, you're going to have different responses regardless of the calories that they have.
Yeah. We use this measure of heat energy, apply it to our food, and then put it into a complex organism and think things just react the same way, and that's not how it works. I do have a question about
I was just going to say, we're not a combustion engine.
Exactly.
I mean, that's just not how we work.
Exactly.
So it's going to be different. We're a chemical processing plant, and so that's just going to be a different model.
Yeah. So when it comes to the fructose, and I'm not sure about the study you're referring to, Lustig study, or just in general, but I was posting about fructose a week or two ago, and I was just talking about its negative interactions with vitamin D. But people went up in arms. These are people that love fructose, I guess, but we're like, hey, fructose, I think this was an in vivo study I was referencing, but fructose in vivo versus fructose in a piece of fruit versus high fructose corn syrup. I mean, to me, it breaks down to fructose. You can tell me, does it matter if it's in this food matrix, or what are your thoughts about that? That's what everyone was on me. Fructose in the food matrix different than fructose in the study. I'm like, okay, it's fine, it's in vivo, but I'm just, I think.
Yeah, well, I think the burden of proof, belongs to them, doesn't it? Because there's tons of studies showing that fructose is harmful and harmful in any form that you take it in. And so they're saying, no, in honey, in the matrix of honey or fruit, whatever that means, it's going to be good for you. Okay, prove it. burden of proof is on you. Dr. Saladino, this is, I mean, this is coming from him really, and from Carnivore really is, and they're saying that, from these sources, it's okay, but they provide absolutely no evidence to that end. And so, that's, so I don't know why people are just believing that out of hand. It'd be nice, if he has some evidence to provide, that would be great. That'd be interesting to look at. One thing, he had a debate with Dr. Gundry of the Plant Paradox, and Gundry was, very opposed to fructose, and he was saying, no, this is bad. And apparently Saladino stymied him by saying, okay, well, provide me a study showing that, fructose in the form of fruit and honey causes a problem. And you couldn't do it. Okay, well, my response to that would be, provide me a study that show that it doesn't cause harm. That show me a study that shows that fructose from honey and fruit is fine.
Right.
There are no studies that show that. So, it's not really very helpful to say, oh, well, you don't have a study, therefore it's true. That's not true.
Absence of evidence is not evidence.
That's it. Yeah. And so, it is true that there are things in honey that are going to be good for you. This is food for animals, not mammals, and certainly not humans, but it's, it's going to have some things that are beneficial. So it's going to be a net positive for the honey versus, sucrose. Sure. But that doesn't mean that the fructose stops behaving as fructose.
Right. That's kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, why would it?
Like, it's not a different molecule. It's still fructose. So I was like, am I missing something here?
No, well, it wouldn't. It doesn't make sense that it would. And it actually has more fructose than high fructose corn syrup. So, we have fructose involved in different foods that have vitamins and minerals and things that are good for you. So does that mean that jelly donut is actually good for you because of the matrix of the donut? This fructose is actually good for you? Well, not so far,
So, yeah. The only thing I was thinking, like, the only argument I always try and think both sides of the argument. So the only argument I could think of for the benefit of the food matrix is you have this high fructose in these fruits that are also high in fiber. So if you just try and eat a ton of fruit, you're going to feel terrible. So it limits your capacity to eat a ton of fruit. So to me, fiber is always kind of like this band-aid to help make a food that's really not ideal for us less bad. Whereas like a high fructose corn syrup soda, you can just down sodas like without limit. Whereas fruit, you eat like 10 apples, like even frugivores probably feel just terrible. I imagine like it's hard to handle that kind of. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that is my argument for the food matrix being better than a soda.
Well, no, but you're totally right. And fiber, yes, it's going to be filling, right? So you're going to be, it's going to take like 10 apples to make a glass of apple juice. Right. Like good luck eating 10 apples in a day and eating like anything else that, worth noting. But you could probably down like 10 glasses of apple juice. No problem. I've done that as a kid. And the only reason I stopped drinking is because we ran out. And, because it's addictive and you just want that sugar. But fiber will also delay the absorption and block the absorption of fructose and other nutrients, which is why fiber is bad, because you're actually stopping yourself from getting proper nutrition.
Anti-nutrient, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so it works that way for things that are bad too, like fructose. And so this is something that Lustig describes. He says, oh, fruit's fine because it has the fiber, and this will block some of the absorption of fruit. And it doesn't block all of it, but it will block some of it. And then that will get into your colon, and your gut bacteria will eat it. Whether it eats it or not, it doesn't matter. It's already through at that point. You're not going to absorb it in your colon. Yeah. But it's but you're still going to absorb some of it, and Lustig never showed that I saw, exactly how much that it delays or stops you from absorbing. So you're still going to be getting fructose, and you're still going to be absorbing some fructose, but not as much. That's true. And so, if you have an apple that has X amount of grams of fructose, no, that's not going to be the same as just consuming X amount of grams of fructose in the form of sucrose. That's true, but you're still going to be, but the fructose that you do absorb is going to be used the same way as all fructose. You know, I mean, these things get absorbed individually. You know, like when you're pulling in fructose, you're pulling in glucose, they go down specific pathways. It doesn't matter what matrix they were in. You know, you're eating a lot of things. Usually we eat like mixed meals, we're eating all bunch of different sorts of things at the same time. That's all in some big mixed mash mush, but your body's picking out the individual molecules. Right. You know, so it separates them out, and there's no reason to assume that, you know, it's not going to behave the same way once it's absorbed in your body. And I've certainly not seen any of them who are proponents of this provide evidence for that. Now, if there is evidence, that's great, but I've yet to see any of it.
And so the evidence that I've seen, play devil's advocate a little bit, is studies that show like people that have eat more fruits and vegetables, let's just say, and better health outcomes. To me, these studies are massively confounded by the fact that someone that's eating a lot of fruit and or like these like voluminous amounts of vegetables, it prevents you from eating, one, too much, and two, like just the worst foods that are that above that, like the plant oils that we're talking about and the sugars, and like basically the junk food, which is noticeably, like, it is worse. It's the food that makes up, like we were talking about, 75%, 70% of a kid's diet, 60% of adults' diet. Like those studies are so confounded by the fact that you're not eating a good diet. It's just better than the standard American diet. And so, I mean, that's kind of devil's advocate in favor of those foods, but really it's not in favor of those. It's just more in favor of those than the worst food offenders.
Yeah. Well, also, you know, I mean, think about the people that are making it a point to get a lot of fiber and vegetables and fruit.
Exactly. Healthy user bias, classic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, you know, it's like, you know, we've been told that fruit and vegetables are really, really good for you. So they're trying to do the right thing. And so they're going to be conscious, and they're not going to be eating all the other crap that goes along with it. So, you know, even though fruits and vegetables are not good for you, they are better than other things. And so, you know, yeah, exactly. I mean, these things, you know, have a lot of confounding factors that simply just, you know, just muddy the water, and you're not going to be able to look at it quite clearly. So yeah, I don't think that there's any reason to suggest that biochemically fructose acts differently when you get it from fruit as opposed to when you get it from a jelly donut. I haven't seen anything that even suggests that, you know. But you know, people do suggest that, but you know, but even then they go and you know, like some people were saying that, you know, like Carnivore Aurelius was saying that, you know, he was getting 40% of his calories from just orange juice. Orange juice. So not oranges, not
it's fruit. Like a healthy diet. Like this is a healthy thing he's trying.
That's what he was saying.
Oh,
he was saying now this was sort of last year. I don't know if he's still doing this, but that was, I know I saw he wrote an article. And you know, I think the guy's funny. I thought he had a lot of good resources. You know, I don't think he has a background in, you know, science or medicine, but you know, he's clearly, you know, an intelligent person who's interested in these sorts of things and likes to dig in. But at the same time, I think he sort of, you know, got a bit distracted by something here, whatever it was, and now he's taking in a lot of fructose, and he's saying that, like, no, now I feel so much better and everything's great. It's like, well, of course you feel better. I mean, it's, you know, fructose is a drug. You're getting a drug response. You know, like, do Coke. I'm sure you'll feel even better. You know, that doesn't matter. You know, that's not really the end all be all.
You know what I find interesting is, and maybe, I mean, for me personally, I think a lot of people in this space, what draws people to a carnivore or a heavy meat-based diet is they really try and understand, like, we are a human species probably designed to eat a certain diet. And what makes sense? Okay, this ancestral diet is what's going to make sense to people. And in no way, I don't know how you could argue that 40% of your calories coming from orange juice could resemble any kind of appropriate ancestral diet. Like that makes no sense. So you have to then go on some kind of like tangent to say that humans are no longer normal kind of like animals, and we do not operate like in the wild as we should, so to speak. Like, we are so genetically different, which from an evolutionary standpoint, just there's not enough time for genes to just change like that. So that argument, I I just don't know. I understand, like you said, he feels better. I can't just disregard someone's like anecdotal experiences, but at the same time, it's just like, so to me, it would provide like cause cognitive dissonance, being like, what brought me to this way of eating, and now I'm doing this, and these are just two very different things.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, like, we didn't evolve with orange juice, like, by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, even the modern oranges just didn't exist for that long, So like,
Yeah.
where were we getting these things from? And we survived through ice ages, many of them. And there's some people try to make a pretty I just know it's not very compelling argument that, like, no, everyone just lived towards the equator, everyone just sort of moved away from that, and so no one actually lived in any temperate region. I'm like, are you out of your damn mind? Like, there's like, you can say that all you want, but the evidence is totally against you. I mean, we have abundant amount of evidence to show that people lived all throughout the northern and far southern reaches during ice ages. So like, that's incorrect. And so maybe the people around the equator had more access to fruit, seasonal fruit, or maybe they had and longer seasons of fruit growing, but that wasn't all of humanity. And certainly in those areas, in those northern reaches where people were just hunting mammoths and other large megafauna, there wasn't fruit available. There just wasn't. Maybe we knew what sort of tubers or whatever that we could pick up when we were starving, when we couldn't get what we wanted. But there's a lot of evidence to show that people actually had an abundance of food, because a mammoth is big. And when you force a whole herd of these things over a cliff, you're going to have food for the next couple of years, sometimes, depending on the size of your tribe. And so when you're sort of running down, it's not like these people were idiots. They had the same capacity for intelligence and speech and thought and reason as we do, probably more, actually, because their brains actually developed to a greater extent than ours have now. Our brains are 11% smaller on average than before the agricultural revolution. And if you look at how these people lived, everything was oral tradition. They had perfect photographic memories. In ancient Greece, they talked about how when they were coming up with the written word, there were people saying, it's like, hey, this is a bad idea. This is if you can just write things down, then you don't need to develop your memory. And like, that's, so we're going to lose our memory. They had perfect memories. And I mean, think about, Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey. This was like an 1,100 page poem, that was passed down for hundreds of years by oral tradition. So just word perfect poetry. I mean, most people can't remember 5 lines of poetry, let alone 1,100 pages.
Yeah.
And and this is something that they routinely did. So back in the day, they were probably more intelligent than we were, inherently intelligent than we were. They didn't have the same technologies, but they had to do a lot more with a lot less. And so, yeah, they're gonna realize, and they're like, oh yeah, actually, we're out of food now. Oh, how'd that happen? No, they're gonna know, months in advance or weeks in advance, like, hey, we're running low. We need to go find something.
Right.
So there's a lot of evidence to suggest that these people just really never ran out of food in those areas. And there were other areas, like in Washington State, in the Columbia River Basin. There was a Native American tribe, I forget the name of it, but if you look at civilizations and the wealth of a civilization as a product of how much time they have to spend every day getting food, and getting what they need to sustain life, that this society in Washington was the wealthiest society that's ever lived, that's ever existed, because they had these weirs and these nets set up in the Columbia River, and they just constantly caught these big old salmon. And so they literally did no work for their food. They just went over, got some fish, ate some fish. All their time was leisure. Their entire lives were leisure. And so, were they really, running out of food? No, So, so they didn't need to pick tubers and hunt for berries. They could if they wanted to, but they never needed to. And so, yeah, I think that that's just trying to force something in that's not really there by saying no, we actually did eat a lot of fruit and we only lived in the equator. I don't think that evidence supports that.
Yeah, so you brought up a lot of things that I want to like touch on, because I agree, which I feel like this is not common opinion whatsoever, is that people assume humans throughout evolution, like we were in constant food scarcity. And I was like, I think the evidence suggests the opposite. And like if we look at paleoanthropology and archaeology, and we look and see, and I was influenced a lot by Mickey Mendor, who's a paleoanthropologist. Yeah. But basically, like what you were saying, we killed off these massive elephants, and then we moved to smaller ones, and like the size of our prey have kept shrinking because we were just decimating large animals very easily. Like it wasn't much of a struggle. But it became more and more of a struggle towards the agricultural revolution, where like the size of these animals were shrinking. And we do see an improvement in like hunting technology as that happens, as would be necessary to catch like a faster, smaller animal. But like you said, I think that's 100% like that's what the evidence suggests to me, and it makes sense like logically as well. But one thing you mentioned was like, and I'm curious your thought on, I don't eat a lot of seafood. I eat it here and there. What are your thoughts? Like humans tend to congregate both today and throughout history on shorelines. Today, maybe more business, transport, kind of reasons. But in the past, maybe it was before like fishing. What's your thoughts about humans being like fish eaters versus meat eaters versus like a combination?
Yeah, well, I think there's definitely both, and depending, sometimes different populations would have had both. There's certain areas around the U.S., especially like coastal Florida, where the Native Americans actually like fished it out, and like this stuff. We talk about like overfishing now, and how that's that's only like a modern occurrence. Somehow that's just just something that we just figured out how to do. But no, they have done that historically as well. And there were areas around the U.S. that they were just fished out. And then if you look at Australia, especially around Tasmania, there's different explorers have written accounts and books about their experience exploring around Australia and dealing with the native Aboriginals. And one that I was reading was talking about around Tasmania, how that they were marveling these people just only ate meat, and they were extremely healthy, very long lived. They didn't get the diseases of the West, which now we just call chronic diseases.
Right.
And they, especially around Tasmania, they were not only eating seafood, they were only specifically eating shellfish. So they were only eating lobsters and mollusks like abalone and oysters. And so they would just free dive down and just pick a bunch of oyster shells or abalone or lobsters. The lobsters here don't have claws, so you can just grab them, and you can actually still do that. So you can just go along the coast here in Western Australia. There's certain places where you can actually just swim out, and you'll just see lobsters going around, and you just grab them, and you get it's like $40 for a fishing license for the year, and you can take 8 a day. And so like I know people, like before they go into work, they just go out to the beach, and they just dive in, pick up 8 lobsters, throw them in the freezer, and then come back after work and grill up some lobsters every day. I'm like, that sounds awesome.
That does.
And, yeah. So they were doing that here, and they were exclusively eating just shellfish. And the European explorers were actually offering them, vertebrate fish, just normal fish. And they were like, oof, no, we don't want that. Now, that could have been, maybe they were just distrustful of, foreigners giving them food. Maybe they thought they might have been poisoning them, or maybe they just didn't want it. But either way, they refused it. And so they were only eating that specific kind of shellfish. And then, like that Native American tribe in the Columbia River, Yeah, they only ate fish, really. I mean, I'm sure they would have
Yeah.
hunted otherwise, but they didn't need to, and so yeah, you definitely would see a lot of that. But then, there's others that, living more internally, they're just going to be, they're going to be,
Land
they're going
animals.
to have access to the terrestrial animals,
Yeah.
and yeah, and so especially like in the ice ages around these mammoths, like if you have access to mammoth, like you don't need to, waste
You're
your
not doing
day
anything
fishing.
else. Yeah.
No, yeah, yeah. It's like you take down a mammoth and you're good for the year, or you can just sit there with a fishing pole, for all day, and maybe catch lunch, you know.
So
But
do you personally eat much seafood?
sometimes it's not as much though. Mostly what I eat is beef.
Yeah.
So probably 97 to 99% of what I eat is beef, and probably 99%. Every now and then I'll have some pork bellies or something like that if I want to get a bit more fat. Very rarely I'll eat some chicken, but I almost never, just because I don't like it much. I mean, it's not bad. I enjoy the taste, but I certainly don't prefer it. And then lamb sometimes as well. But yeah, the vast majority of what I eat is just beef. And then every now and then I'll just be at Costco and I'll just see a salmon and be like, oh, it looks good. I'll just grab it.
That's kind of how I am with the seafood. I'm like, hey, I haven't had in a while. Why not?
Yeah.
Any dairy?
Very, very rarely. So I don't drink milk, um, because I don't want the hit of lactose.
Lactose, yeah.
Yeah. So if I were to eat dairy, it would be in the form of cheese, and I would melt that onto beef. So it's like if I was having a beef patty, I'd melt some cheese on it, maybe.
So I'm like you. I've not eaten dairy besides small amounts of butter to grease a pan, maybe a little bit of cream here and there. Um, I'm not talking about just for years, but for like decades. Like I've just never been like a dairy person. And I'm asked about dairy all the time. And so I basically just give them what I've researched, written about, so I've referenced an article. But the reason I bring this up is like, I always like to like experience things personally. So next week, I'm actually doing like a raw milk experiment next week. I haven't had milk in ages. I'm going to go slow because something about like, I was never lactose intolerant. So I imagine I have a degree of lactase persistence, but I imagine also like that enzyme down regulates if you haven't had it for 20 years. And so, so I'm going to start off small to see, see how it goes.
Yeah. Well, if your body's capable of making it, and when you give it a stimulus, it'll start making more. But yeah, maybe the initial insult might not go so well. But raw milk is difficult to go slow with because it's amazing. It's like drinking pure life force, and so it's like that's another reason why I avoid it, because it is delicious. And like I just, probably the last 3 times I drank raw milk, there's only certain places you can get it in Washington State. You can't really get it at all in Australia. And so when I was back home, I found this place that had raw milk, cow's milk, as well as goat's milk, and it was like a half gallon. They only did by half gallons for goat's milk and a full gallon for the cow's milk. And so I would get it and I tried it. I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. And like I just sat there, I polished off the whole 1.5 gallons just sitting there over the course of like an hour at my brother's house. And I was like, it's just so damn good. I just didn't want to stop. And so there's that carbohydrate sort of drive. Your body's just like, get more. And so, that's another reason why I try to limit that. But like you honestly feel like you're just drinking pure life force. And it's an amazing feeling. You're just like, this is like everything that you need it's speaking to you, and so it's something that I could easily
Overdo.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's what with like a lot of people in dairy, where it's like they are not lactose intolerant, but if they have like weight loss goals and they can just like crush cheese, dairy of all kinds, heavy whipping cream. See people like, all right, I'm gonna start cutting back on like heavy whipping cream to 1 cup a day. I'm like, 1 cup a day, like that's not cutting. You don't measure heavy whipping cream in cups. Like that's not the measuring utensil.
That's a lot.
Yeah. I want to be respectful of your time here, but I did have one last thing I wanted to ask you was nutrients. Particularly, I'll say the most common ones people give me like pause about. Obvious one, vitamin C. we could talk about fiber, but fiber is not an essential nutrient, so we can leave that one out. But vitamin C, folate, manganese, I'd say those are maybe the three most that people have concerns about. Any thoughts on not meeting RDAs in those?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not too worried about it. The RDAs were developed when people were eating a mixed diet. So, you need a different constellation of vitamins and minerals based on what you're eating. So, manganese is a good example of that. Manganese, you have to think about what these things do. I mean, think about vitamin C, right? So vitamin C, well, you need to take more in just to stave off scurvy. And yet none of us are getting scurvy. Why is that? Well, because you require far more vitamin C if you're eating carbohydrates in a mixed diet, whereas you actually need vitamin C in measured in nanograms if you're just eating meat, and you need it in milligrams if you're eating carbohydrates. So, that's orders of magnitude, more. So that's a massive difference. Manganese as well. What does that do? It actually helps you process, plant food and vegetable nonsense that you're eating. Yeah. Well, if you're not eating plant matter, then you don't need the manganese. If you don't take the poison, you don't need the antidote, basically. Yep. And that's the same with other these micronutrients that are found in and around fiber, which is why they say it's better, you need to get the fiber as well. That's where the micronutrients are. But these micronutrients are important if you're eating plants in the first place. And so if you are eating plants, sure, get the fiber. But if you're not eating the plants, you don't need it. So and either way, this. You always just have to boil it down to first principles. This is what we evolved on. That's what all the best evidence shows. And so if this is what we evolved on, then whatever's in it is exactly what we need in the proportion that we need it. That's where I leave it. I mean, you can go into details on some of these things, and and it's interesting too, but you don't necessarily need to. If you understand that concept, that no, this is actually how we were designed. And so just somebody coming in, oh, well, this is the RDA, therefore you're deficient. And it's like, except that I'm not.
Yeah, except for that I'm not. That's a good point.
Yeah.
I always find it interesting, like in nature, we were talking about dairy, like nature packages things up like with the micronutrients that we need. And like dairy, which has a lot of calcium in it, but rightfully so, it also has a lot of vitamin A, D, and K2, which helps direct that calcium to the right place. But when people tell me like they're supplementing calcium, and I'm like, just like supplemental, that makes me nervous, because I'm like, you're taking a natural nutrient out of its package Matrix. And you're trying to, yeah, exactly. You're trying to micromanage your micronutrients. I'm like, you can't outsmart your body or nature. I mean, you could try, but like it's actually, and then the research around just like supplementing calcium, it's like, it's terrible. Like you need to come with the fat soluble vitamins to like direct it, like not into your arteries and into your bones. And so yeah, I think supplements are an interesting topic. Like we were talking about the healthy user bias, and one of like the big studies on supplements is like, you would think studies on supplements would suffer from the healthy user bias. Like healthy people are more likely to take supplements, are more likely to be wealthy, have more access to medical care, all these things. And yet the research on supplements show like increasing mortality. I'm like, that should tell you enough. Like it should suffer from the opposite bias, and you still aren't getting the benefit. So yes, but a lot of people ask about supplements and like, should I be taking XYZ? You never want to tell someone like, hey, I don't know, like you don't want anyone like getting sick on your account, but at the same time, it's like, look, this is how I think about it. This is what I'm seeing with other people, not supplementing. Like that RDA, the history of the RDA, I think is really interesting. Like these recommendations basically based on like, if you look at like a normal distribution, like 4 standard deviations out, like they're like trying to hit so that no one, like the person who needs the most amount of that nutrient is getting that. Whereas like that person is, like you said, eating a standard American diet, sickly, old, whatever it might be, where they have a huge increased needs for a super like dose of that nutrient. Well, they're applying that to everyone, where we, if you're not eating that, you might be over here on the standard deviation curve, but they're recommending you some
Right.
huge amount that you don't need based off 4 standard deviations of a
Yeah,
standard American diet. So it's like, yeah, a lot of times
no,
the RDAs don't apply to
no.
a proper diet. So
Reality. Yeah. And, and also I just think that, I mean, they could be very well done in the context that they were performed, but they were also done by, Ansel Keys, and and that guy's an absolute douche. He was the one who, well, he was one of the guys who was paid off by the sugar companies to, falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol caused heart disease. When it was really sugar, and to cover up for sugar. He did the 7 Nations study, but he actually had, and that looked like there was, as a country has more cholesterol intake, it also has more heart disease, but he purposefully omitted data for 20 other. He had that complete data for like 23 countries, not just 7. And so those were just like a scatter across the map. So there isn't even, he knew that there wasn't even a correlation. If there's no correlation, that proves there's no causation. So he knew that at the time, and yet he made it appear, and he made the argument that this was actually such a strong correlation that it was causative in nature, which you can never do. You can never show causation from correlation, but that was what he was able to convince people of. And so, everything that guy does is suspect. I think everything that he has ever done professionally should just be thrown out and spit on and then burned, because he is a corrupt dealer. He is an absolute con artist, and he's corrupt. We know that. And so how do we know that he didn't do things in a corrupt fashion at other times as well? And like, maybe that's doing some real science that he did a disservice, but that's entirely on him. He is the one who discredited his own reputation and made it so that we can't believe a thing that he put out. And I don't think we should.
I think like this really takes us full circle, because like that study, I consider the deadliest study ever done, because in a big way, it was the catalyst to substituting animal fats for these plant oils that we like hydrogenated, which then got banned 100 years later. But I mean, in a real way, he was like the catalyst of animal fat is bad, which basically made meat bad and sent us down a spiral in the wrong direction. So I think that's a good place to wrap up. Anything else? Like, where can people find you? I know I've been eating up a lot of your content. You're doing tons of podcasts. So where can people find you?
Yeah. So I have a YouTube channel, just Anthony Chaffee, MD. That's where I put out most of my things. Excuse me. And I also have a podcast called The Plant Free MD, and that's just on any podcast platform. And so I put on the audio version of pretty much everything I do on YouTube, though there are some unique things on each one. And then I'm on Instagram, just Anthony Chaffee MD as well. I have a website that I'm developing or in the middle of developing called thecarnivorelife.com. And then I have things on like Twitter, like Anthony.Chaffee. And, I put up some little video things, shorts and clips on TikTok, but I really don't use that. I don't really care to use that as a medium, but it's that's my main thing, is the YouTube channel and podcast, and then Instagram.
We'll link all that stuff up. But yeah, Anthony, thank you for the time today. I'm looking forward to meeting you in person in Austin, KetoCon.
Yeah.
So that'll be fun. But anyways, thanks for your time, and talk to you later.
No problem, man. Thank you for having me.
Yep.